Alright, now that we have created our plugin with the UXP developer tool, let's just take a look at it within Visual Studio Code. So I've opened the live workshop folder we've selected in the previous video and just opened it up, and let's have a quick look at what the files are that actually exist within our plugin project. First of all, we don't really need the README. It is just a file that explains the basic plugin that got created initially. So I'll just remove or delete this file because we won't need it, and it can just be confusing at first to have files that we don't actually need. And with that, we are basically left with 4 basic files. We first of all have a manifest.json file, and I'll get to that in just a second. We have a main.js file, which is basically where all our JavaScript code actually takes place. That then gets run when we execute our plugin. And last but not least, we have an images folder with 2 icons. And these icons actually, if we now go back into Adobe XD and we look into the plugin we've created, you can see that this icon basically resembles this icon right here. So it's just the place where this icon then exists within our plugin project. Alright, coming back to the manifest.json file, we can have a quick look in here, and you will recognize a lot of things that we previously specified during the plugin creation within the UXP developer tool. So for example, we have our plugin ID right here, and as I've mentioned previously, if you want to change it, for example, because you later decide that you want to publish this plugin and therefore get an official ID from the Adobe Developer Console, you can just change this ID right here to whatever you want to change it to, and you will be good to go. Also, for example, we have our plugin name right here, which we've specified. We have our host, which is XD in a minimum version of 43.0.0. We have our plugin version. We now also link to these icons right here. So this should also be rather self-explanatory. We have a set of icons which have specific dimensions. So for example, the @1x icon file has 24 by 24 pixels resolution, and we just link to it right here. And we also have the bigger version, which is at 2x 48 times 48 pixels. Last but not least, and maybe the most important part, we have the UI entry points specification. And this is basically a specification of where users can interact with your plugin. And there are 2 main types of entry points. First of all, there are panel plugins, which basically, when you run them, open a panel on the left-hand side of Adobe XD. And this is also what we call a persistent UI, because it stays there until the user closes the plugin, and the user can still change the document while the plugin is running in the background, so to speak. Next up, we also have command entry points, which are basically entry points that when a user clicks on the plugin within either the plugins menu or the plugins panel on the left-hand side, we just run a specific JavaScript function once and basically execute the code. So one example that I've personally developed using this is my Lorem Ipsum plugin, where when a user selects insert placeholder text, I don't really need a persistent panel. You know, it's just taking up space that basically the user might want to use for something else, and therefore it's much easier to just run Lorem Ipsum when you need it and just click run Lorem Ipsum, and then it runs, and then it's closed again. So that's the key difference between the 2 types of entry points. Also, within this workshop, we will first of all create a command entry point, and later go back basically to having it as a panel to then enhance our plugin with customizability through the UI, so that a user can then, within our UI, choose specific settings of how the plugin should be run. Alright. Next up, we have the so-called main.js file, and as I've said, This is basically where our JavaScript code lives and where we will basically do a lot of work. And for now it looks really complicated because it already has this like fully functioning enlarger rectangle boilerplate functionality within it. But I just want you to ignore all that you see right here, right now. And the only thing that you really should take note of is within our manifest.json file, we have this panel ID right here, which is called enlarge rectangle. And within our main.js file, we actually export an enlarge rectangle symbol, so to speak, a variable that then defines what should be done when the plugin gets shown. So we have our show function, which we link to, which is just defined up here, and also an update function, which gets run whenever the selection or anything within the document changes. And we also define this right here. So as I've said, you don't have to understand everything within this file right now. We will get there eventually during this workshop, or at least to something similar. But the one thing that I want you to take note of is that within these UI entry points, we basically define an ID that we will reuse within our JavaScript file to basically identify that this belongs to that. And yeah, with that, we have our basic structure of an XD plugin. And in the next video, we're going to take a look at actually expanding this plugin to create some functionality of our own. And also, this is the point in time where we have reached our first checkpoint. So in case you couldn't follow along for any reason, you can just copy the step 0 folder from the GitHub repository and continue on from there. Because right now we are basically at the stage where all files should be completely identical to our checkpoint. With that, I'll see you in the next video, and thanks you for watching.